On the night he married her, Prince Kael could not remember the color of her eyes. He remembered the ink on the treaty, the weight of the crown upon his head, the way the hall fell into a careful, hopeful silence when she crossed the threshold. He remembered the murmur of lords who had doubted this alliance would ever come to pass. He remembered his father's hand, heavy and satisfied, resting a moment on his shoulder. But her eyes, no, those slipped away from him in the blur of duty, like a detail not yet worth noticing. She was Arianwyn of the Western Vale, last child of a king whose lands were lush but fragile, prized by every neighboring power. Her marriage to Kael was a seal on a map, a line drawn to keep border skirmishes from flaring into war. He had agreed because it was wise, because it strengthened his claim, because he had been raised on lessons of power. How to gather it, how to hold it, and how never to let it slip through his fingers. He did not agree because he wanted her. In truth, he did not think of wanting anyone at all. The wedding was held under the ancient glass canopy of the Sky Hall, where the ceiling caught the stars and scattered them like fragments of moonstone. The air smelled of jasmine and smoke. Soft music cradled the vows as they spoke them, word by word, like people carefully stepping onto an unfamiliar bridge. When it was done, Kael turned to his new bride with a practiced courtier's smile. She curtsied with a grace that felt quieter than the rest of the evening, as if she were not bowing to him, but to some invisible presence inside herself. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice gentle, unhurried. "Your Highness," he replied. The words sounded correct, polished, and hollow. He had married her for power. It seemed straightforward enough. In the kingdom of Lyrian, power was not only measured in soldiers and gold, but in the old magic that flowed beneath the land like a hidden river. The eldest trees in the royal grove could remember coronations and funerals long past. The mountain winds carried faint whispers of promises kept and broken. Most people lived their lives without feeling such things. Kael had been taught that a king must be above such sensibilities. Emotion, he had been told since boyhood, was something to be ruled, not something to rule you. The Western Vale, Arianwyn's home, was different. Its stories spoke of rain that listened, of rivers that bent for those who asked gently enough, of flowers blooming out of season when someone with a true heart passed by. The court in Lyrian half believed those stories and half mocked them. Kael did not mock or believe. He simply did not care. He wanted ships, grain, and trade routes. His marriage gave him those. That was enough. From the first day, he tried to place Arianwyn where she would be most useful. "You will sit beside me in council," he told her on their second morning, when sunlight poured through the high windows and turned the stone floor to gold. "You understand the economic matters of your father's lands. Your presence will reassure your people." "Of course," she agreed. "And you will receive the envoys from the north while I review the guard. They must see we are united. I will do my best." Her assent was calm, unruffled. He waited for hesitation, for the sharp glint of calculation behind her expression. It did not come. She poured tea for them both, her hands steady, as if the prospect of navigating a new court and a kingdom of strangers did not daunt her at all. "You may find our counsel direct," Kael warned. "They will test you. They test everyone. You must show firmness." "Firmness is not new to me," she said. There was no boast in it, only quiet truth. He watched the steam rise between them, curling upward like a question he did not know how to ask. The first weeks of their marriage unfolded in a series of formal duties and small, careful conversations. Kael noticed the way the courtiers watched his new queen, measuring her, weighing her, wondering how much of her would be pliable and how much might need to be pushed. He intended to set the tone. In the council chamber, with its long table of blackwood and its windows overlooking the city's rooftops, he made his expectations clear. "The Western Vale's river tolls must be adjusted," Lord Malin declared one morning, his fingers drumming impatience. "Now that we are one kingdom, There is no reason they should profit more than we do. Kael glanced toward Arianwyn. It would be her first true test. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "may I speak?" He nodded. "You are queen of this realm, you may always speak." Her gaze moved around the table, taking in each face. There was no nerves in it, no arrogance either, only a steady, thoughtful attentiveness. "Lord Malin," she began, "the river is narrow where it passes through my father's lands. Ships must be guided by pilots who know every bend, every hidden rock. The tolls do not only buy passage, they buy safety. If we strip them away too quickly, my people will fear we no longer value their lives. We will gain coin in the short term, perhaps, but we will lose trust." "And what is trust measured in?" Malin scoffed. "Can we eat it? Can we forge it into armor?" A few chuckles rippled around the table. Kael watched Arianwyn directly, waiting for her to falter. Instead, she folded her hands lightly on the table. "Trust," she said, "is what keeps a harbor open in a storm. When trouble comes, people run not to the richest place, but to the place they believe will shelter them. If we wish the Western Vale to be united with Lyrian not only in law but in heart, we must show that we understand them." She turned slightly toward Kael. "So I propose we keep the tolls for now, but reduce them by a fifth, and send engineers from your finest river guilds to improve the channels. Let the people see that our union brings both fairness and care." Silence settled a moment. The idea was thoughtful, balanced. It would cost effort, but it would bind her homeland closer to his. Kael had expected her to cling protectively to every advantage. Instead, she opened her hands, yet did not abandon her people. He realized he had misjudged her, just not in a way he could yet name. "Very well," Kael said. "We will follow the Queen's proposal." Later, when the council had dispersed, and they walked together along the balcony that overlooked the inner gardens, he said, "You handled them well." She smiled, small and genuine. "I have seen storms before." "You were not afraid." "I was," she admitted. "But fear is like a guest. You acknowledge it, but you do not hand it the keys to the house." That answer stayed with him, longer than any treaty clause. Kael did not know, when he first noticed, that she waited for him at night. It happened quietly, in the way that truly important things often do. His days were long, lessons with advisors, audiences with petitioners, decisions about roads and granaries and border disputes. He stayed late with maps and documents spread before him, his mind a tightening circle of responsibilities. He had married for those responsibilities. Power, he had always been told, must be earned daily. At first, when he returned to their chambers well after moonrise, he expected darkness. A queen, he supposed, would retire at a respectable hour, leaving their shared rooms to his late arrivals, his quiet footfalls, his carefully controlled solitude. Instead, the first night he came back past midnight, he found the lamps still softly lit and Arianwyn sitting by the window, a book open in her lap. She looked up, and her face eased into a light he had not yet seen directed at him. "You are late," she said without reproach. "There was much to attend to," he replied, shrugging off his cloak. "You do not need to wait for me." "I know," she said simply. "Would you like tea? I kept it warm." He should have said no. It would be kinder, perhaps, not to invite expectations. But the room was gentle with lamplight, the air faintly scented with dried apples from the Western Vale that she had brought with her and hung near the hearth. The idea of sitting just a few moments where the world did not press so closely appealed to him in a way he did not examine. "Yes," he heard himself say, "thank you." One night became several. Several became many. Some evenings he returned early enough that the sky was still tinged with the last blue of dusk, and she would be there, embroidering or reading, her posture relaxed, as if she had never doubted he would come. Other nights he came long after the city had settled into sleep, and yet she remained awake, always with that quiet question in her eyes. "How was your day?" He answered more than he meant to. At first, the details were harmless. Numbers of shipments, temperaments of distant lords, the behavior of a particular hound at court. But slowly, without intending it, he started telling her about the weight of choice, of how one decision could tip the lives of thousands, and how, on some nights, he lay awake hearing the unasked questions of a future he had not yet shaped. She listened. That was all. She did not offer platitudes or try to solve what was not yet ready to be solved. She asked precise, gentle questions that showed she had understood. Often, she said little more than "that sounds heavy," or "it seems you did the best you could." But in those words, something in him loosened. He noticed other details, too. Things he would have missed if he had not begun, against his intention, to look. She thanked every servant by name, not only when they brought her something pleasant, but when they came with news of delays or difficulties. She visited the kitchens not to inspect, but to learn, asking the cook to show her how certain herbs from the Western Vale might grow in Lyrian's climate. When a gardener's child fell and scraped her knee in the palace courtyard, Arianwyn knelt in the dust of her fine gown, cleaned the wound with clean water, and hummed an old lullaby until the child's trembling eased. Kael saw all this at the edges of his days, like glimmers of light in a forest where he had thought only crows nested. It unsettled him, though he could not have said why. He had known his queen would be clever, perhaps even ambitious. He had braced himself to manage her, to steer her, to keep her from seeking power that should remain in his hands. But she did not reach for dominance. She reached for people. And people, he realized, were reaching back. One evening, after a meeting that had gone badly, with border envoys threatening to withdraw their support if he did not send more soldiers to their defense, and his own general's warning of stretch and strain, Kael came to their chambers more tired than angry. Bone deep, quiet tired that made every step feel like a question. He opened the door to find Arianwyn asleep in the chair by the window, her head tilted, a woven shawl slipping from one shoulder. Her hand rested on a closed book. A thin braid had come loose, curling against her cheek. He stopped, an unfamiliar tenderness pressing unexpectedly against his ribs. She had waited again. He had not asked her to. He had told her more than once that it was unnecessary. Yet she had done it anyway, and sleep had finally claimed her where she sat hoping he would arrive. For a little while, he simply stood, watching the slow rise and fall of her breathing. The lamps painted her features in gentle lines. In that stillness, she was not a queen, not a treaty, not an alliance, but a person who had chosen to share the long, uncertain evenings of his life. He moved quietly, taking a blanket from the end of their bed and laying it over her with as much care as if she were made of glass. As he adjusted it near her shoulders, her eyes fluttered open. "You're back," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. I didn't mean to wake you." "It's all right." She sat up a little, tucking the blanket around her knees. "Has the day been hard?" "Yes." "Will you tell me about it?" He hesitated, then poured out the dilemma, the tension between border obligations and the strain on his own people, the fear of leaving one side too weak, the knowledge that any choice might invite unrest. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, eyes thoughtful. "When my father faced floods," she said finally, "he taught me something I did not understand at first. He told me, water always seeks the lowest place, go there before it does. At first I thought he meant only the fields, the dips where the flood would hit hardest. But later I realized he also meant the hearts most afraid. When trouble comes, it does not strike everyone equally. If you can, go first to the most vulnerable. Help them bear the weight, then the rest will endure more easily." Kael studied her. "You think I should send aid first where the danger is greatest, even if it angers those who are merely anxious?" "I think," she said gently, "that you should decide what sort of king you wish to be remembered as, and let that guide you when the options all seem costly." No one had ever framed it to him like that, not as a tactical choice alone, but as a reflection of his truest self. He had always thought of rulership as a constant fight to hold on. She was asking him, in her quiet way, who he wanted to be when holding on was no longer the only goal. He did not yet have the answer, but the question itself opened something. In the months that followed, the shape of their life together changed in ways neither of them spoke aloud. Kael began adjusting his schedule so he would return before midnight, then before the last bell of evening, without fully admitting to himself that he did it in part because he knew she would be waiting. The council noticed, faintly surprised, when he sometimes turned to her in the midst of debate and asked, "What do you think?" Not because he lacked an opinion, but because he had started to value the way she looked at things from the inside out. When petitions came from the Western Vale, she read them with care, yet did not press for special favors. Instead, she asked that scribes write back explanations when requests were denied, so people would know they had at least been heard. He found that reasonable. More than that, he found it good. On market days, they sometimes walked among the stalls in simple cloaks, without full escort. It was Arianwyn's idea. "A king who stays always on the throne forgets the weight of a single loaf of bread," she said. "You cannot govern hunger from a distance." At a stall selling carved wooden birds, Kael watched her talk with the craftsman, not about prices, but about the grove where he gathered his wood, about the weather that year, about his daughter who had fallen ill in the last winter and was now recovered. Listening, Kael felt, for the first time, a curious mixture of humility and pride. Humility, because he realized how many lives lay under his protection that he barely knew. Pride, because the queen by his side treated each of those lives as worthy of gentle attention. He had married her for power. But power, he was beginning to understand, was not the only measure by which a life could be rich. The change within him did not arrive with thunder or revelation or any sudden breaking. It came like dawn in a quiet valley, slowly brightening edges, softening shadows, making visible what had always been there. He found himself seeking her gaze when difficult topics arose, not because he needed her consent, but because he cared what she would see in him if he chose one path over another. He discovered that when he spoke harshly in council, remembering the lines of worry that created on her brow tempered his words. He realized, with some astonishment, that he wanted to be the sort of man who deserved the patience she had shown him. One late autumn evening, as wind rattled the shutters and the first frost laid its delicate lace over the garden, Kael stood by the fire, watching the flames. "You do not have to wait for me every night," he said. The words came out more abruptly than he intended. Arianwyn looked up from her weaving. "I know," she answered, as she always did. "It is not required. It is not part of the duty you owe this crown." Her smile was small and slightly amused. "Then why does it trouble you?" "Because I do not know how to deserve it," he thought. "Because I have no control over this kindness, and that should not matter, and yet somehow it does." Aloud, he said, "I have set your place here with intention. I have tried to shape this court, this marriage, so that everything serves the stability of the realm. But you," he stopped, uncertain. "But I do not fit in the plans as you expected," she supplied gently. He nodded. She set down her weaving and came to stand beside him. Her presence was quiet, a warmth at the edge of his awareness. "My father taught me another thing," she said. "He said, 'The river follows the shape of the land, but the land is softened by the river.' When I came here, I thought I would become like a river bending around stone. I would fit myself to whatever you and your court required of me. But perhaps," she added, looking up at him, "we are both changing shape a little." He met her gaze. For the first time, he noticed that her eyes were not merely one color. They held copper flecks near the pupil, like sunlight caught in brown glass. "Does that frighten you?" he asked. "Change always does," she said, "but not as much as staying forever in a shape that does not feel true." "Do you feel true here?" he asked, heart unexpectedly tight. After a moment, she nodded, more and more. He did not reach for her then. He did not confess that somewhere along the way, The woman he had married for tactical advantage had become the first thing in his life that did not bend to his design, and yet did not threaten him for that. Instead, she altered him, softly, insistently, in places no crown could touch. He did not yet have a name for that, but the realization sat in him like a small, steady flame. The test of all this came, as such tests often do, not in some grand battle, but in a single, quiet decree. Winter that year was harsh. Snow piled against the city walls, and the north wind tore at roofs and chimneys. Crops in the higher fields failed, and messages arrived from distant villages. Food stores dwindling, livestock weakened, roads blocked. The Western Vale, fed by its river and sheltered in its valley, fared better than most. It could send grain, but doing so would leave its own people leaner. There were also whispers at court, older lords who had never fully welcomed the union muttering that now would be a good time to remind the Vale who held true power, that the Queen's homeland could be pressed for more than its fair share, for the good of Lyrien. One night, after a day of tense discussions, Kael sat alone in the council chamber, the candles burning low. Charts of supply lines lay scattered before him. If he demanded more from the Vale, he could fill the central granaries and buy security for the capital. If he did not, the capital would feel the pinch as acutely as the border towns. His advisors had made their positions clear. What remained was his decision. He knew what the older version of himself would have chosen: maintain the heart of power at any cost. Better a hungry border than a restless capital. Power first, always. He stared at the ink on the paper, hearing Arianwyn's words echo. Decide what sort of king you wish to be remembered as. He thought of the craftsman in the market, of the gardener's child, of the river pilots in the Vale whose careful eyes watched for rocks in the dark. He thought of Arianwyn, who waited each night not out of obligation, but from a choice so small and steady it had remade his sense of home. Power, he realized, that is grasped and clung to breeds only more fear. But power that is shared, that is used to bend closer to those most in need, becomes something else, a trust that outlives a single reign. When dawn streaked the sky with pale colors, Kael summoned his scribes and wrote a decree. The Western Vale would send grain, but so would the royal estates closest to the capital. Rations would be reduced in the palace itself, so that more could be sent to the furthest villages. The city's nobles would be required to open their storehouses, with compensation later, to share the burden. The poorest regions would receive the first shipments, even if it meant temporary discomfort in the capital. When the council objected that this would anger the powerful families, Kael said only, "Let them be angered. I will not let our strength be built on the backs of those with the least to spare. If sacrifices must be made, they will begin with me." Word spread, as such things do. Some grumbled, some worried. But in the villages where the snow lay deep and the granaries had grown bare, people lit candles when the wagons arrived and whispered prayers for a king they had never seen. That evening, Kael returned to his chambers exhausted, but with a strange peace humming under his fatigue. He opened the door to find Arianwyn where he had come to expect her. By the window, a shawl around her shoulders, a pot of tea waiting. "You heard," he said. "Yes," she replied. "The messengers from the Vale reached me before dinner." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "My people, they are afraid, but they also say they have never felt so clearly that Lyrien is their home too." He sat opposite her, feeling suddenly shy. "I could have taken more from them," he admitted. "I was urged to, it would have been easier." "I know," she said. "I chose otherwise." "Yes." "Because of you." The words surprised him as they left his mouth, but once spoken, they did not feel like a loss of control. They felt like truth. She looked at him, her gaze steady, searching. "Because of me alone." "Because of what you have shown me," he said slowly. "That there is strength in gentleness, that listening can be as mighty as command, that a king who shields only his throne loses the right to ask for loyalty. I have spent my life learning how to hold power. You have taught me how to let it move through me toward others." Silence settled between them, soft as falling snow. "You have changed, Kael," she said at last, her voice warm. "I did not try to force it. I only stood where I was and tried to remain true." "I know," he said. "That is the one thing I could not bend, no matter how I tried to shape this marriage to my design. I married you for power, Arianwyn, but every day you have reminded me that hearts are not pieces on a board." He reached across the space between them, not as a king staking a claim, but as a man offering an open hand. She took it without hesitation. "You fell first, you know," she said, a hint of gentle laughter in her tone. He blinked. "Did I?" "Yes, I watched you choose again and again to listen when you could have commanded, to yield when you might have crushed, to soften when pride would have been easier. I had promised myself I would serve this union, but not lose myself in it. And then, little by little, I saw that I did not need to choose, because you were becoming someone with whom I could be wholly myself." The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind had quieted. "I am afraid," Kael confessed, surprising himself with the honesty of it. "Of what?" "That I cannot control this, what I feel for you, what it makes me willing to risk." She squeezed his hand. "Then let that be the one thing you do not try to control. Let it be the place where you are only Kael, not king. Even kings need at least one such place." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since his coronation, the weight on his shoulders did not feel like chains, but like a cloak he could choose to wear or lay aside in this one room. "I will protect you," he said quietly, "even against my own kingdom if ever it forgets what we have learned." "And I," she replied, "will remind you of yourself if ever you forget." There was no thunderclap to seal these promises, no magic sigil in the air. Only two people, sitting close in the lamplight, hands joined. Yet the old magic of the land took notice. In the royal grove, an ancient tree put forth a small spray of leaves, green against the frost. In the western vale, the river ran a little clearer that night, as if released from some unseen tension. Years later, when bards sang of King Kael the Just and Queen Arianwyn the Gentle, they told of laws passed and roads built, of winters weathered and borders held. But the older storytellers, the ones who sat by fireplaces and in quiet kitchens, spoke instead of other things. They told of a king who learned to measure his greatness not by how many obeyed him, but by how kindly he could hold those who did not have to. They spoke of a queen who waited each night not because it was commanded, but because love, to her, was the steady choosing of another's company despite the lateness of the hour. They told how he had married her for power, and discovered in her the one thing he could not command, a heart that would only ever be freely given. And in that surrender, not of his crown, but of his insistence on control, he found a strength that outlasted his reign. For realms, like rivers, are shaped most enduringly not by storms, but by the patient, persistent flow of quiet choices. So the legend says that if you walk by the river in the Western Vale on a winter's night, when frost dusts the banks and the stars lie scattered like seeds in the sky, you may hear a soft voice on the wind. It will not be giving orders. It will be asking, gently, "How was your day?" And somewhere, in answer, another voice will reply with the honesty only possible when power is set aside for a moment, and two souls sit together in the warm light of a shared home.